Here we are again, June on the Range. I enjoyed June on the Range so much last year. I read some good books. What I read last year was The Californios by Louis L'Amour, The Light of Western Stars by Zane Grey, The Mark of Zorro by Johnston, McCulley. Of course, I had to read it off my cheat sheet here. Shane by Jack Schaeffer. And I read a Christian novel written for women, Heart of Gold by Robin Lee Hatcher. So I could say I had a really good time reading those Westerns last year, and I've read a few other Westerns in the past. And so I wanted to do it again this year. And so far this year, I have read Flint by Louis L'Amour. I have to say I was kind of disappointed with Flint because last year I read The Californios by Louis L'Amour, and it was really, really good. I enjoyed it so much. It was mystical, it was philosophical, and Flint was written about 20 years before he wrote The Californios. So Flint was from a younger Louis L'Amour, and it was more of a shoot-'em-up Western with male egos. That's what I like to call those kinds of books. So Flint was a man who came from the East Coast to die in New Mexico. And so he had been told he had a terminal illness and he expected to die. So he went to a place that he remembered from his childhood. In the first chapter, you learn, or second chapter, I don't know, early in the book, you learn that he had been found after some kind of a massacre took place. Everybody else died, and there was this little child all by itself. And so this man, Flint, adopted the man. And he went through life with a made-up name because he really didn't know what his parents were named. And he became quite successful in life. And then when he found out he was going to die, he just wanted to go back to the place where Flint had his hideout. And that was New Mexico. And he took on Flint's name instead of using his own name, which was much better known because of his success in life back east. So, really interesting book, seeing him work through his issues. But I didn't like it as much as the Californios, and that's why I was disappointed. And there was a lot more gunfighting than in the other book. So I learned something about Louis L'Amour. Probably if I'm going to read any more of his novels, it will be more those books that he wrote in the latter part of his career. Live and learn. So another book that I read, I don't know if you would call this a Western, but it's certainly west of the East Coast. It was O Pioneers by Willa Cather, my first time ever to read a Willa Cather novel. And O Pioneers was her first successful novel. Took place in Nebraska. So, I'm doing this USA road trip this year, USA road trip reading adventure. And so I am happy to say I have now read a Nebraska book and a New Mexico book this month. So I'm adding to that all the time. And right now I am reading The Oxbow Incident. Kind of funny thing happened on the way to getting this book read. I'm almost halfway through it, and I've been reading on my Kindle all this time. And a few days ago, I happened to be looking through my books that I had right here in my little carts. And I found this copy of The Oxbow Incident. It is a beautiful book. Looks like it's never been read, and I have no idea where I got this book. Seriously, I have no idea whatsoever why this book is in my collection of books. I guess I could have picked it up at a yard sale or a secondhand store or something like that during the time that I was in Wairika after the fire. You know, my home burned in a fire in 2020, and I had to go live in Wairika in a hotel for 2 months. So I picked up a lot of books at that time, and I don't know if this was one of these or if I got it some other place. I just don't know, but it's a beautiful copy of the book, and I'm only halfway through it. So instead of reading the rest on my Kindle, I'm going to go to this hardcover copy that I think is just absolutely pristine, like nobody has ever read that book. So happy to have it. And I have a couple of other books planned for later on this month. We're right now in the mid-month part of June. Well, today's the 15th of June, so that says it all right there. A couple other books I'd like to read. Well, right now, I should say, I'm reading or listening to an audiobook version of a Zane Grey novel. It's called To the Last Man, A Story of the Pleasant Valley War. This was actually a true history event. Took place in Arizona, and apparently two families had an argument. There were the cattle people and the sheep people, and the cattle and the sheep people did not get along for various reasons, and so they started killing each other off. And so that's kind of why it's called To the Last Man. Says everything right there. And it's by Zane Grey, and I hope I do not dislike it as much as I didn't like The Light of Western Stars last year, but we'll see. It is a requirement of June on the Range if you're going to do it the official way to read a Zane Grey book, and that's the only reason I'm reading a Zane Grey book right now. Two other books that I'd like to get to if I have time this month are True Grit by Charles Portis and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. So I was pondering why it is that I like June on the Range so much, and I don't think it's because I live out west. I do live in California. I live at the very top of California in the Klamath River Valley. I have like no relationship to San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego, except that I have been there, you know, I've seen it. I lived in San Francisco when I was very young. Never lived in Sacramento, Los Angeles, or San Diego. And I don't really feel attached to that part of California anymore. In fact, my part of California is what should be called the state of Jefferson, which is it's basically a section of California and southern Oregon that is meant to be a separate state, but they just haven't got it arranged right yet. So someday perhaps I will be able to say I live in Jefferson. But until then, not quite. Still about 20 miles south of the Oregon border. And I realized that the reason that I love June on the Range is because when I was young, very young, I used to go visit my grandparents a lot, and they watched Westerns. I guess it was mainly my grandfather that liked these Westerns, but my grandmother was, okay, she was watching the Westerns too, and she was reading the Louis L'Amour novels. I remember that. But I started thinking about all the Westerns they used to watch there and thinking about early Western TV shows. So I thought I'd remind you of a few Western TV shows that I remember from my early childhood. And top of the list is Bonanza. I watched many Bonanza episodes, and who can forget that? You know, I was surprised when I went to Lake Tahoe, it's about maybe 20 years ago. I stayed at a campground with my two children, and when we got up in the morning, there were a lot of vintage old cars traveling past, like a parade. And so we followed them, and we followed them like halfway around that lake, which is a huge lake if you don't know. And when they got to the other side of the lake in Nevada, they stopped at this place that was actually the place where Bonanza had been filmed. And I didn't even know it was there until that day. And there were like hundreds of old cars there that day. So it was some kind of old car convention that we participated in the parade just because, well, we just got lucky, I guess. Although I didn't have an old car, unless you want to call a 1991, what was it, Ford Escort. Well, it was an old car, but it wasn't that old. And so Bonanza is one TV show I remember. And then there was Wagon Train. I remember having watched that one. I don't know how many episodes I watched, probably not very many. Maverick, I remember watching that over at my grandparents' house. And Gunsmoke, I think we watched a lot of Gunsmoke over there. You got to realize that when I was a kid, it was the 1950s. These were black and white TV shows, and Westerns were very popular at that time. There was one called Rawhide. I remember that one. And the Big Valley. The Big Valley is kind of special to me because I realized later on in life that I was living in the Big Valley when I was a young adult. Well, about in my 30s. I was living in the Big Valley. I moved from Redding, California, where I went to college, down to, where was it? Modesto. And Modesto, Merced, Manteca, all those places, those are Big Valley cities. And so the last one I wanted to mention was the Virginian. And I saved it for last because it was a great TV show, but also it was a book. And a couple years ago, I did read that book. It's by Owen, Wister. And I discovered that that was actually, it has been called the first Western novel. It is a classic. It is so important to the Western novel genre. I think everyone should read The Virginian by Owen Wister. Takes place up in Montana, Wyoming, that area. I enjoyed looking up the locations on the map while I was reading it. And there's a little love story in there. They say that a lot of Westerns are love stories, and really most of them do have something like that happening in there. So they call them Westerns, and they're for men, basically, but there's a lot of romance in those Western novels. Okay, I won't say all of them because like Shane, not so much. But Oxbow Incident, so far I haven't noticed any romance in there. Anyhow, that's it for June on the Range mid-month ramble, and I will be seeing you later. Until next time. Thanks for coming to visit, and I'll talk to you again soon.